Hi, everyone. Before we get into today's episode, we just wanted to let you know that this week we did a lot of chatting and our originally recorded podcast was actually an hour and a half long. Because we've been working to make shorter podcasts, we've edited it down for you, but we do feel as though a lot of the conversations that we had were valuable. So if you want to listen to a full hour and a half podcast this week, you can head over to our Patreon page. It is available to all of our patrons regardless of the amount of money you contribute. Also, becoming a patron gives you access to our bi-weekly watch parties, all of our uncut episodes from season 1, and a few other bonus things. Plus, it helps support us, the creators. Okay, cool. Let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, and welcome to What the Phalange, the podcast where we watch every episode of Friends, discuss it, deconstruct it, and fan over it, one episode at a time.
My name is Emilie, pronouns she and her.
And my name is Quinn, pronouns ze/er or they, them.
This week we're talking about Season 2, Episode 2, 2 for 2, the one with the breast milk. This episode aired on September 28th, 1995. It was written by Adam Chase and Ira Ungerleider, and it was directed by Michael Lembeck.
In this episode, Joey enters into a department store Western alternate reality. Monica begins to bond with Julie, Ross's new girlfriend, behind Rachel's back. And everyone is drinking Carol's breast milk, and Ross feels weird about it.
So, how's it going? Hi.
It's going pretty good over here on this end of Toronto. How's your end of Toronto, Emily?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Yeah?
It is what it is.
It is what it is. How's the weather over there? Although we laugh at that, and there has been times where you've called and it's been snowing at your end and not at our end. So, you know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's been some weird stuff going on. I'm also like a lot more meters up off the ground, and so I feel like it's just always windier.
It's a different experience. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so Quinn, this episode, what are your feels?
I love this episode so much, and I feel like rewatching this episode for the podcast has made me like appreciate it all the more. I mean, I want to like it's part of like the three things that I want to talk about, but I think that this episode is extremely well executed.
Yeah, I agree.
How about you? Yeah?
Yeah, so yeah.
You seem a little bit less psyched than I am.
No, because I thought you were gonna say your full three things, but you were like, this is a little bit related to the three things I wanted to talk about, and so I was expecting you to say the three things you want to talk about, but you didn't.
But I didn't. Okay, so I can go into
so just say them and then I'll go.
Okay, sounds good. We can take turns. Okay, so this episode, I mean, I feel like we're going to overlap a lot, but I want to talk about like breastfeeding in general, breastfeeding in public, and I think we got some really, really interesting results from our polls that I'm like really stoked to talk about. So that's like one of the main things I want to bring up. I want to talk about relationships when it's like talking about navigating new relationships with people and how they affect your current relationships with people and all that sort of stuff that we see happening with Monica, Rachel, and Julie. And then, like I said, I want to talk about how awesome and well executed I think this episode is. How about you?
I think, okay, so for first impressions, like, I think I said this to you after we watched it, like, this is actually one of the few Friends episodes that doesn't have a lot of, like, super problematic things. Mm-hmm. Like, it's one of the better ones when it comes to that, and you don't watch and you don't cringe in the same way in this episode as maybe you would have last episode.
Oh my god, yeah, especially coming off of last episode. I'm like, oh, I wish this had been like the first episode of this season. Last week felt like so heavy to start a season.
The season was rough. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to talk a little bit about how well things are executed, but mostly like I want to talk about, and we talk about this a lot in the show, but specifically like the ways in which the Friends writers create these parallels to like different scenarios.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So like, like Joey coming in and like being at the bar, basically, like being at a Western bar. But then also like Monica and Rachel later on with the affair. So I kind of want to talk about that. I guess like as someone who's never breastfed, like I feel like I don't have a lot of opinions around breastfeeding, except for like what I know from like being around people who breastfeed. And so I guess like I definitely want to talk about it in general, specifically like breastfeeding in public. And then like, yeah, I guess the idea of kind of Monica's validity in her friendship with Julie and the scenario that Monica is kind of in and the whole story around that. Basically, I just want to talk about like the 3 different plot lines, really.
Yeah, and I really appreciate how they're all like, it's like very like 3 very distinct plot lines that we get to follow. And we kind of talked about this before the episode started, but to bring everyone else in, we decided that we are going to talk about the plot lines as like individually this week. So we'll like, talk about Joey in the Western. We'll talk about Rachel and Monica cheating on her. And then we're going to talk about the Breastmilk finago, all separately, one after another, which I'm very excited about because I feel like this will give us, I feel like they're like 3 really juicy, really fun storylines that will just be great to get into them individually.
Yeah, definitely. It's also, I guess I also want to talk a little bit about Ross being a baby.
Yeah, that's
because
fair.
like, I want to talk about Ross's maturity level.
Would it be an episode of What the Phalange if we didn't bring up the fact that Ross is a baby?
But specifically, like, okay, I feel as though it's just like goes to show you the ways in which like people are mature in different ways and the ways that people are like responsible in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think like Ross is like basically represents like the ways in which a person can like go from being like a really smart and mature to like being like collapsing into this like petty ridiculousness,
Yeah.
Like if why don't we just get honestly, if you're cool with it, like I would love to just get right into the cold open.
Okay.
Oh, wait, actually, you said that you wanted to talk about something in particular.
What we did at the beginning of last season is that we like set up the season. I mean, part of what like this podcast is about is sort of like revisiting the fact that it's, from like this is a 90s show. It's 90s nostalgia. But at the same time, like this is like a really alive show. Like it's not dead. It's not the past. It's like literally we're talking about a show that was created in the 90s, but is a present, currently influencing piece of pop culture. Essentially, we didn't really have the space in it last episode. It was a long enough episode as it was, and it was a heavy enough episode as it was. So this episode, season 2, we want to set it up with what was happening in the world when season 2 came to be and was like airing live. And just to put things in the world into perspective, I want to point out things like JavaScript, which is a computer language, was first introduced throughout the time that this season came out. Let's look at the fact that on October 3rd, O.J. Simpson's trial ended. We had Pokemon come out for the first time throughout this season. Bill Clinton was the president of the United States at the time. Also, I want to point out that like residential schools, like the last one didn't close until, there's different sources that say different things, but a few of them say 1996. Some will say like 1998. And this is specifically residential schools in Canada, which were part of indigenous genocide that happened in Canada. In 1995, in October, we had the Million Man March, which was a march of millions of specifically Black men to essentially try to like voice that they want to be portrayed differently in media and be treated differently instead of being continuously villainized. And I think that this is like a particularly pertinent thing to like recognize right now, especially when we've had so much movement in the Black Lives Matter movement right now. But just to remember, like, this has been going on for a very long time. And the Million Man March was a very big thing that happened in 1995 when Friends was in season 2. I just dumped a ton of history on you guys, but just to put things into perspective of what was happening in the world throughout this season. And we'll keep reminding you guys throughout this season of these little things and probably other things as they come up.
Okay, so I kind of want to go into the cold open. I just want to talk about Ross being a baby. That's why. But not really. First, I want to talk about, okay, so set up for the cold open, we're obviously at Monica and Rachel's apartment, because are we ever anywhere else than Monica and Rachel's apartment? And that's actually something that I want to talk about this episode, because I feel as though there's a lot of times in which they shouldn't actually be at Monica and Rachel's apartment, but they all are still there.
Oh my God.
And you're like,
yes.
Monica and Rachel aren't even around. Like, what are you doing here? Anyways. That aside, so Carol and Susan are there, and it's so nice and so sweet, and every episode that has Carol and Susan is a great episode, so that's why I love this episode.
Yeah, like that's clearly why this was one of the best episodes of the season.
For sure. And Susan has so many good lines in this episode. Like, she makes this episode in a lot of ways.
Oh
like,
my God.
She's so pure. I love Susan. I also wrote in my notes that I find Monica's outfit in this scene is really good. Like, she's wearing this kind of like crop top, almost looks like a sports bra, but it's like got crisscross, like where the rib cage is.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really cute. And Rachel also rocks some pretty good crop tops in this episode. I took a note about that. And yeah, it just made me realize how much I love crop tops, you know? They're just great.
We say in the dead of winter.
Yeah. Well,
really, it's like, I just wish it was warm enough outside to wear a crop top.
True. Yeah, that too. Okay, so obviously Ben is hungry, and Carol starts to breastfeed, and the, Joey and Chandler, who have the emotional depth of a teaspoon, start to panic. I think that's a line from Harry Potter, so don't give me credit for that line. They freak out and they leave, and this is like Ross. Okay, so Ross is actually decent.
Yeah, that's
in this scene.
I was gonna say. I think Ross is actually handles this scene perfectly. Like this scenario, I think he basically handles it quite perfectly.
I kind of wrote in my notes, at one point Ross says to them, "Would you guys grow up?" Ross telling people to grow up is kind of ironic, but on the flip side, in a lot of ways, he really is the most mature. And like we've had this argument, I think, like near the end of season 1, we were arguing about this, but like in more of the traditional realms of like going through the motions in a capitalist nuclear family lifestyle, like Ross takes the cake in terms of like being the most mature, the most like put together, and the most like going through the motions in his life.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, he's also like just like a big baby, and we kind of see him be a big baby throughout the episode in other ways.
But I want to point out like what he does like really well in this scene. Like you have his 2 dude friends who like freak out, get uncomfortable, run away. And he addresses it. Like he goes over to them and like doesn't allow them to just like stay in this like immature space, and is sort of like, he knew that Carol was okay with talking about it and very comfortable. And so he like, is like, okay, how can we make this comfortable for you guys? Like you should ask some questions, And then they come over and they're like the most immature, the way that Chandler's like, Joey would like to ask you some questions.
Yeah, they're really playing it up like they're like school children,
totally.
Like embarrassed like 13-year-old boys, sort of thing.
And then, Ross is there sort of like next to them, holding that space for everyone, kind of giving them a bit of like emotional support in his like presence. You can sort of see it in his stance. And then as soon as they like cross a line to a point of being like, this is not helpful, like he does the right thing of like shuffling them away and being like, okay, that's enough, guys, you know? And he does like, I think he does a really good job of mediating that situation where it's like he's trying to pull them in and like destigmatize the situation and make everyone comfortable. But then at the same time, like when it's like clear that it won't happen, he does the right thing to like make sure that Carol still stays like the most comfortable and is not having to like be put through some like idiots, you know, just like not wasting her time, you know?
Right.
Or emotional labor, you know? But I want to actually like talk a little bit about like some of the questions that they ask, because I thought they were like, some of them were pretty interesting. So I like how, you know, they ask like, does it hurt? And Carol says that, you know, it did at first, it doesn't anymore. And I guess like I want to add to this storyline the fact that like breastfeeding is so different for every single person that breastfeeds. And I don't have personal experience breastfeeding, but I have loved ones in my life who I've witnessed having to breastfeed. And I have talked to many people who have breastfed. And I just need to emphasize that it is so different for every single person. And I feel like we're starting to get to a point where we're like unpacking that more and more in society and starting to like destigmatize it, and, you know, like realizing that like not everyone has to breastfeed. Not everyone can breastfeed. Breastfeeding is dependent on both baby and the parent, you know, like the person who's lactating. And it's like, it can be extremely painful. There's lots of reasons why people don't want to breastfeed. There's a lot of people who like are very passionate about breastfeeding, and like that's like for them that's good, you know, like but you know, that like lots of kids grow up on formula, and that's also okay. But we should also like, we need to be destigmatizing things in both directions. Like there are studies out now saying that like we should continue breastfeeding children until they're like older than 3 years old, which like to me sounds like, when I first read that I was like, what? but like this is a thing that like realistically is like, we should be working towards this being normal. Should we also be working towards like people choosing to not ever breastfeed or even try? Yeah, we should. So anyway, I just going off on a tangent here. And then I also want to point how she says that like she, you know, when I think it was Chandler asks, you know, how much can you do it? And she says, as much as he needs. And I think that this is like a really big misconception here, that like not everyone can actually produce enough milk for baby. And like I think that like there is like some deep-seated like feelings of like failure that can be like put on people for that case. And I also want to say that it's super normal for you to substitute your breastfeeding with milk. Formula. Anyway. I have some friends who are doulas, and so I feel very passionate about this. Apparently.
No, it's great. I think like you're kind of setting the premise for the rest of the episode, which is good. It's also interesting because, you know, you said something that made me think of the way that we're actually talking about this in general, which is, you said like you were talking about the parents using like a gender neutral term for someone who's breastfeeding. But I've actually been reading that people who are in the industry of like doulas, et cetera, are trying to make the term breastfeeding more trans inclusive by using the term chest feeding, actually.
Oh my God. Sorry, this is great. I'm so excited by this.
Yeah, so I didn't actually, like, I haven't read up enough about it, but it was just like I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw that one day, and so I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it's great, and it's super easy because it just rhymes with it, and like so often people are just like, but it's so true. Like some people are always like, I can't use this trans inclusive word. Like it's totally new and out of my vocabulary. But like this one, like it actually literally rhymes with breastfeeding. And like, it's just like, so it's like actually a pretty easy one to like transition to. So yeah, so I think that maybe that's like, I don't know if we should refer to it like that for the rest of the episode.
Yeah,
because,
let's practice. Let's try. Like, okay, you know, like try to like, you know, use it, and it might feel a little bit uncomfortable at first, but let's do it. And then if we like if one of us catches us not saying it, like using chest feeding, let's try to correct each other.
All right. I guess I was just going to ask if specifically because of the fact that like this episode we're talking specifically about Carol's breast milk, right? Like it's like I don't know if that term is to be applied to every single person, or like if someone identifies as having breasts and using the term breast milk. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I don't know if it's like one of those things where it's like, we're not just going to use, gender neutral pronouns for everyone if people use she pronouns or he pronouns. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think though, like if we're trying to just make a general term, a like trans inclusive, like also I think it's fine. Carol is not a real person. and we can use this podcast.
I beg to differ.
I know that we talk about them like they're real people, but Carol isn't real.
Carol and Susan are the loves of my life. Okay.
And I think we should just use this as an opportunity to use this as an opportunity with the non-real person to use the language, like practice using new language. Before we move forward, I want to thank our new patron. We have a new patron, guys. So I want to thank Beth for joining and becoming a smelly cat. And I'm very excited. So welcome to our bi-weekly now watch parties and all the fun little goodies, digital goodies that you get behind the scenes once you start subscribing to our Patreon account.
And on that same note, if other people are interested in becoming a patron, we'll put the link in our show notes. Like Quinn said, we always do watch parties every second week, but it's also like just a really great way, even if you can't join the watch parties, it's a really great way to support our podcast. Our few patrons are the ones that are keeping this show going and are the reason why we have a season 2. And so, if you want to see a season 3, if you want to see a website, donate to us on Patreon, because it'll make a big difference in our ability to make this podcast what you want it to be and what we want it to be. So that would be great. And also, if you can't give us your dollar bills, that's okay. We understand. Shit is rough right now. Dollar bills. Please at least follow us on Instagram or leave a comment on iTunes, because that helps the algorithm and it makes people find us more, which then allows for more people to join our community and more money on Patreon.
Yeah, really just like sharing us with as many people as you possibly can, and being active on our Instagram account just really helps us out a whole bunch. So
following this plot line.
So the next scene in this plot line is they're in Monica and Rachel's apartment, and Susan, Ross, and Carol and Monica are there, and they're dropping off, Ben to basically be looked after by Ross for however, I don't know, is it a day? I don't know.
I know, it's kind of weird. Like I don't understand really why, like it must be overnight.
Maybe.
Because they're wearing different clothes when they come back.
Okay, so there you go.
But I don't understand why she's dropping all of this stuff off. Okay,
yeah, no, but
this is where I don't understand.
Exactly.
Every single thing takes place at Monica's and it makes zero fucking sense.
Yeah, and kind of like last episode where it's like they just get off of the plane from China and they've literally been traveling for 12 hours and they decide to take the taxi to Monica's apartment.
Yeah, we didn't mention that.
And take their luggage there instead of like dropping off their luggage at Ross's first and then like being like, let's stop. I don't know. It was just, anyway.
Maybe like we don't know the geography of New York. So maybe like it really is just going by. But why would they bring their, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
it makes zero sense.
No, it all makes zero sense.
That's last episode.
And so this episode, they're like dropping Ben off at like Monica and Rachel's, and it's strange because like you said, they come back in different clothing. So are they like, did they leave him there overnight? And if that's the case, did like Ross stay?
Did Ross stay overnight?
Yeah. It all just like doesn't make sense, but for the sake of, yeah, we get it. It's a set. We get it.
They just didn't want to have to like go to Ross's apartment set,
Yeah, or something, anyway. I'm sure Monica's
But
loving
like,
it.
I understand that yeah, they definitely like treat Monica and Rachel's apartment as like the central apartment for everything.
Yeah.
And so like I'm just assume that maybe their friends just know, like Susan and Carol just know that. I don't know. Anyways, moving on. Susan has some great freaking lines
So great
here.
lines. Yeah. Love it. Like when Carol is freaking out a little bit, clearly very nervous about leaving Ben for an extended stay with Ross, and Susan says, it's like, it's gonna be fine. Ross is great with Ben, you know? And he looks at her with such like surprise, and she's like, don't look so surprised. I'm a lovely person.
And the way she says I'm a lovely person is just so deadpan. Like, it's amazing.
I love it.
She's my favorite. She's like a beautiful combination of sarcasm and just like 90s fashion, and she's beautiful and I love her so much.
Okay, I wanna
She also got Ben a little shirt, a little onesie that says "My mommies love me," which is so cute, and I love that.
I love it so much. Okay, I want to go into the portrayal of Susan though for a second. So like Susan is the portrayal of like the queer or like the gay feminist woman, you know? And okay, I'm thinking of like me back when I was younger and like my perspective of both like feminism and gayness was very like limited to essentially what the media fed me as a person. And then like the perspective of me as an adult, as an adult queer, and coming from my own perspective as a queer person. And I guess I want to ask you, like, when I was younger, I sort of felt like Susan was villainized in a sense. Like I kind of felt like she was a person, she represented a person that I'm not supposed to want to be. Does that make sense?
Like I get what you're saying. I don't know if I ever felt that way about Susan.
Okay.
Like I actually don't feel like the show is necessary. Like I feel like the show is trying to portray that Ross is being unreasonable and Susan is being reasonable. Like I don't think they would have had, oh, this is a spoiler. I can't say it. Never mind.
Okay.
But they have some future episodes in which they like showcase Susan and Carol's relationship in a way that like you're excited by their relationship. You're not like rooting for them to fail. Mm-hmm. So I don't feel
right
like that actually.
It's just interesting because it's like now as an adult queer, I'm like, wow, I relate to Susan so much. I love her so much too, because I think that like there are aspects of her that is like very stereotypical, but in a lot of ways there's also like it's just like very accurate. You know, like just
I don't really, it's funny that you say that because I actually don't find that she's like super stereotypical.
Really?
I feel like usually when you see like queer couples on television, they really make it seem like one of the like two women is like the man, you know, like they really create this idea that like one of them is more butch, one of them is more masculine, into sports, and what they're basically trying to show is that like queer relationships are like straight relationships, just one of them is a girl. Like this kind of like really effed up idea of like heteronormativity but in a queer relationship. And I actually feel like this show does that differently. Like the fact that both of them are like quite femme and like kind and delightful and whatever, you know, and besides the fact that Susan is like, you know, pretty sarcastic, like there's not, but I don't actually find her character any more sarcastic than someone like Chandler. Like I don't actually find her a stereotype in a lot of ways. So it's interesting that you say that.
Right. Oh, I don't know. I feel like I'm still trying to understand my like childhood perspective of Susan, and like I love her so much now, but I guess I sometimes wonder, like ponder the difference of like was like I don't now that I'm queer, or always was queer, now that I know I'm queer, and can like embrace everything that Susan is, I'm kind of like, this is great, and I really appreciate this character. But before when I had like, I was younger mind and really had only a perspective of like of queerness through like the villainization of queerness and the villainization of like feminism, et cetera, et cetera, I thought that Susan was maybe not the best character. And I guess I find that like an interesting thing, because it's like, was the show necessarily doing something wrong? Like maybe not, but like, but I guess it's like not having to look, like having to recognize that like pop culture is like not necessarily just one piece at a time. It's like we have to look at like the general representation at one time to like understand that like what is going to be influencing us and how we're going to perceive something, even though it's not necessarily being like made out in a wrong way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So anyways, so Susan has that great line where she's a lovely person, blah, blah, blah. And then like following on with that storyline, they're all there kind of supporting Ross later on taking care of Ben. Phoebe heats up the breast milk and like sarcastically is like, of course I know how to heat up breast milk. Like, duh.
I know.
Which, like, when have we ever known Phoebe to be around children?
I know.
Ever.
Phoebe has, like, such, like, strange knowledge and skills that you're just like, you're a mystery. I want to point out that, so we did this great poll question where it was, like, honesty time, you know, asking our audience, like, okay, let's be real about this, folks. Are you uncomfortable when someone breastfeeds around you? So only 11% of people said that they are comfortable when people breastfeed around them.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so 89% of people said no, and and it's interesting because it's like, first of all, I know that like the majority of like our audience, like the people that we attract to listen to this podcast, are people who are like okay and like supportive of the concept of people breastfeeding in public and around them. Mm-hmm. But I just appreciate that it's like that we can have now like an honest conversation about the difference between like feeling comfortable about something, but then in contrast being supportive or okay with this happening, you know?
Right. Yeah, totally. For sure. I feel like there's a lot of things that like make me uncomfortable, but like I'm not in support of them. Like you don't need to be 100% comfortable with things that are like right.
Okay, I want to add some layers to this though. Okay. So then we also asked another question, and I'm going to correct myself as I read it out. If you have chest fed, are you comfortable chest feeding in front of others? And we had 80% of people who have chest fed and answered this say that yes, they are comfortable. But what I find particularly interesting, so with Instagram polls, we can actually like go in and see like what people have answered, right? And I was kind of curious. I started to compare basically the people who answered that like, yes, they're comfortable chest feeding in front of others. So like they have the experience of having chest fed in the past, and looking at their answers for the question of are you uncomfortable when someone else chest feeds around you? And some of them actually also answered that no, they weren't comfortable with it. So I just find this like very interesting that it's like, I think generally we're this community of people who are like on the side of wanting to make this a more comfortable experience and a more normalized experience, but like clearly there's a learning curve that comes with it. Anyway, I just find that like all very interesting.
Yeah, like we still need to create space for these things, regardless of whether or not we're comfortable with them, I think is like really important. And that's kind of how we start to get comfortable with things, is like pushing through our own boundaries and pushing through the discomfort for us to kind of create a more inclusive and safe space for everyone.
Right.
I think like a lot of things that change, societal kind of expectations or societal ways of existing change through people just kind of being uncomfortable at first and then pushing through it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, yeah, being comfortable is not a gauge for anything really at the end of the day. Okay, but now we want to move on to the scene. Let's finish. So Phoebe calls Ben dinner, and calls Ben in. So Ross walks in, and then she tests the milk the way you're supposed to, which is like on the inside of your wrist. Then she licks it off instead of wiping it off, and everyone freaks out.
Part of me finds like it's kind of weird. I think like everyone freaking out is maybe like
Also very
little
weird.
Extreme. Yeah. But
What did you just do?
Yeah, exactly. I do love the line from Rachel where she's like, this is juice squeezed from a person. And like when you put it that way, it's like, it is kind of gross.
I asked the question, or we asked the question on the polls. Would you or have you ever tasted chest milk? And 61% said yes. And then if you have tasted chest milk, did it taste like cantaloupe juice? Which maybe I should have saved this for later on in the roll call here, but 62% no.
Okay, so yeah, following that plot line, so basically Ross just finds it's really gross that that she's consuming this, and then they just try to convince him to try it, and he just refuses. But later on in the episode, when Carol and Susan are back in their excellent 90s attire, I pointed out, like she, you know, like there's this moment of like Ross being resentful of Susan for having already had some of the chest milk, and like him just, and then this is where he kind of becomes like a puddle of immaturity with his like inability to kind of like function with the fact that Carol has done something that he hasn't. Yeah, and that's like, it's almost like Ross is really mature, except for when it comes to Susan and Rachel
and relationships. And
yeah, so he basically by the end of the episode, he decides that he's gonna do it, and he's gonna do it with Oreos, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah, okay. The way this ends is just like ridiculous, because it's like everyone was just basically asking him to lick a couple drops off of his arm. And instead he like goes full circle and is like, I'm going to drink out of this bottle. Like it is
yeah,
my,
he basically
like a beer,
like
you
a
know?
baby bottle. Yeah, it's very ridiculous.
And then eats Oreos, which I think is as like his, what's it called? Like backwash, swish? No, what is it? Chaser. Oreos are his chaser. So do we want to move through Joey's storyline?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So, so this is like a hilariously written storyline.
And like this is what
like,
sorry. Like this is what we talk about, like especially like I think you were the one that like pointed it out at the beginning when we started this podcast, of like this is like part of what makes Friends writing so great.
For sure, like this drawing of different parallels to like different scenarios that he's in. But yeah, so for context, Joey, he's selling perfume, I guess, at like a department store. I love this like long list of Joey's part-time jobs that he takes as he's like trying to make it as an actor. I think it's so good. And like it's actually very realistic. It's like one of the few realistic things that they do in this show.
Yeah.
But then, you know, like it becomes this like throughout the entire kind of course of the episode with Joey and this guy, it becomes like it really emulates a Western, like an old Western. Right at the beginning when he's like says, you know, well, he's in my territory. And then the hombre man is like, oh, your territory, you know, which is like, again, within the realm of this like, Western sort of thing.
Is this outfit that he's wearing? It's so great.
Well, he has to wear it, right? That's like, no, I assume that that's part of it.
I know. And it's like, you can tell that it's like a uniform because it's like a shiny, cheap polyester top too, you know, like it's just
so ugly.
It's so good. And I think that this is like an example of like this storyline is so like nonsensical and like not funny, except that the script and the way that it's executed makes it so good. you know?
Yeah, agreed. Like, it's just so unbelievably absurd. And like they're having like this like weird manly man face off. But like for perfume. It's just, yeah, it's hilarious. Later on when Annabelle like decides that she's gonna go, Annabelle's like the name of that coworker that Joey, the blonde woman, like when Annabelle decides that she's gonna go out with the ombre man instead of Joey, like Joey is having this, like, I find he's having like almost like a masculinity identity crisis. Like he's like, I'm not a cowboy, like I'm not manly enough. Like in this very weird, doesn't really make sense kind of way.
Also, what is that line where he like turns around and like the guy working at the cash or whatnot is like staring at him and he's like, wouldn't be the first time that I lost a girl to like a cologne spray.
A cowboy or something.
Yeah, or something. And I was just like, what?
Like what maybe was the other times?
Yeah, and I don't know. Like I just don't understand that line. Maybe I'm missing something, but
later on, like he comes home from a day of work, right? And he like walks into Chandler, and they just set up this scene so well. Like Chandler, like the lights are dim. Chandler's like it's almost like the bar is closed, you know? And like Chandler's wiping the counters after the bar has closed. And then like Joey walks in and he's like in this Western bar and he's like, give me a box of juice. And like all of these things that Chandler does are like, he's just emulating being in a Western bar so well, like sliding the drink over on the table and Joey catches it like so nonchalantly and then he slides it back and then refills it like he's like giving him another shot, but it's like fucking orange juice.
And like talk about like really like using everything that they have to like really create this story. You know what I mean? Like, like it's just, you know, I'm so impressed by this storyline. And like this scene is just like takes the cake. Actually, no, this scene is amazing. Like this, I feel like this storyline just gets better and better with every scene. You know, like like it just sort of like plays on itself at each step of the way.
I think this is my favorite scene in this storyline. This like bar, like I think of this scene all the time. I think it's probably one of my favorite scenes in Friends in general. Like I think it's just so well written and it's well acted and like just the mannerisms that are used, the dialogue, I freaking love it. But anyways, so all this to say that like then later on, this is one thing that bothers me so much is that it like this scene ends and whatever Chandler says like I'll fix you up with a nice hooker, you know, like he's like being sarcastic, like it's like in like again old school style Western bar, but like then he takes Joey's glass and without washing it, he puts his cloth in that he was just wiping the counter and wipes the glass.
But I think that's like in line with an old Western again. Like I don't think because like water
people wash glasses first and then you
not necessarily in old Westerns.
That's gross.
I mean,
people died.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
COVID.
The concept of sanitariness is not quite the same as it was like back then as it is now. You know.
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
And then we get to like the climax scene, which is like freaking hilarious.
This
where
cowboy
it's
face off.
Yeah, where what is it called when, you know, two cowboys
a duel?
A duel? I don't know if it's a duel. Like duels happen in like Bridgerton time. Like this is yes, I watched Bridgerton, everyone.
I do not.
Anyway, whatever. It's gonna bother me.
Fast draw.
So, yeah, essentially
a gunfight. A gunfight?
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about like how quickly you can pull out your gun and et cetera, and how much of a straight shooter you are. I love it how like they have them set up. They look like they're in like the great like stance, like wide-legged, arms away from their body stance, you know, and you know, and then essentially the manager is opening up the door and this person walks in and unfortunately, you know, gets sprayed in the face by.
And then it turns out the ombre man is not even American, like with a Western accent. He's like Australian. Like it's just so random. Like you don't. At the end, he's like. Is it
Australian? I feel like it could be a Southern. No.
I thought I thought it sounded like he actually he's like, Todd, and then he's like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, like I'm such a doofus. Like it honestly sounded like he was like trying to be Australian, like, and so like the character actually is Australian. I don't know.
I also just love how like you take away like before he like didn't have a name and it gave him like so much mystery, and then they basically do a 180 on you and they like give him like a silly name. Not that Todd is a silly name, but it's like you know, not like Blade or something, you know what I mean? It's like an average name, you know, and like give him sort of like a take away his like Batman voice and and you know like suddenly he's like demystified and
it's so good.
Yeah, the mystery is pulled away.
Yeah, and I wrote in my notes, I was like, Annabelle suddenly is like, well, what happened? And like Joey asks her for a drink and like she walks away with Joey into like the sunset, right?
Yeah.
Like but what I find so ridiculous is this, like in this, like I wrote in my notes, like I wrote, lol, thank you for your one-dimensional character, Annabelle. Like, she's just
I know,
like,
right?
she's so useless. Like, she's only there to just be like, you are, like, someone who's won the affection of, like, Joey, who won this, like, cowboy quick draw, you know? Like,
yeah.
It's just so ridiculous. But it just goes with the idea of, like, Westerns, which is so often the women in these Westerns are, like, totally useless, one-dimensional characters, you know? So it's, very, very applicable.
I know.
Out of curiosity, what did people say in the polls of who wore it best? I have a slight bone to pick with you, Quinn.
Oh.
You wrote something different than what I had put as a suggestion for the poll. You wrote, who's the better cowboy?
Yeah.
But I don't want to know who the better cowboy is. I want to know who wore the outfit better.
Oh, interesting.
Which I think is different. Because I think Joey might be the better cowboy. Who knows? I've never seen Joey be a cowboy. But Ombre Man, a.k.a. Todd, definitely wore the outfit better.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. This is like a very, very close call here. And when I took these, like when we're recording this, the polls are not actually fully closed. I think there's only another hour to them left. And it's been going back and forth since the very beginning. It's been a very exciting race, guys.
Wow.
But at the moment, we have Todd at 48% and Joey at 52%. And so that might change. That might change at the very end. So,
but yeah, okay. So let's go through our last little plot line of the episode, which is a big one, kind of. So the whole situation that's going on with Monica going shopping basically with Julie at Bloomingdale's and them developing a friendship. I don't know if we necessarily need to go through like every scene by scene, but I'm down to talk about like some pretty, like, again, the parallels that happen and some pretty like excellent lines that come through. When Julie first invites them to go, like she invites the whole group to like come abuse her discount at Bloomingdale's.
Yeah. And Phoebe is like, I have to bring my grandma to the vet.
Yeah. And my question is like, did she not want to go with her because she didn't want to quote unquote betray Rachel? And so she created a fake excuse? Or do you think that she's like, this is a real excuse? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you think that like Phoebe is actually genuinely going to bring her grandma to the vet? Like, knowing Phoebe, it's a real excuse.
I think this is the beauty of Phoebe, is that she is very strange, and she uses that to remain elusive in all of her actions. You know what I mean? Like you never quite know if you're taking her seriously or if she's just like using her strangeness to get out of something. And so I think that like we will just never know. It's about a 50-50. But yeah, I also think that like if you look at this one episode as a capsular situation, I think that this storyline, like they set it up and play it out really well. Like in this first scene here, like they demonstrate how much Rachel really has disdain for Julie, and like how Julie is like very much a genuinely nice person, really trying to be nice to everyone, and trying to bond with everyone. And just like how that's like, and then just like, they just set it up really well in this scene, I find.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I forgot about that beginning scene. Yeah, Rachel's like, but they're definitely setting Rachel up to be unreasonable. And I feel like that's kind of what happens throughout the episode is that like you're kind of like, should I be siding with Rachel? Should I be siding with Monica? Like, where should my loyalties lie almost?
Oh, that's such a good way of putting it
like,
for this storyline.
Yeah, because, but like, especially like, so I kind of just want to talk about the whole thing as a whole because like, I do feel weird about the way in which like first Monica is like, oh, like, you know, sure, I'll go with you. And then Ross is like so happy that she's going with his girlfriend to do this activity. Like, and I think that that's like actually really important to Ross, like, is the fact that like his sister is taking the time to like bond with his girlfriend. Like, I think that that's like a really like wonderful thing for Monica to do and like, you know, make Julie not just feel part of the group, but like outside of that, but the fact that like Monica and Ross are actually siblings, and so making her feel like she's part of the family as well, you know? So it's like, it's not like, it almost has like twofold to it, if that makes sense. But then, and then Phoebe, I mean, Rachel being kind of like betrayed to me, like while they're portraying it as being like unreasonable, like I just think it's like doubly unreasonable because like, like, first of all, Monica can be friends with whoever the heck she wants to be friends with. But, like, on the flip side, like, Monica's, like, trying to make an effort for her brother to, like, create a friendship and, like, make someone feel included. I don't know. Like, it just kind of feels like that would be so rude if, like, someone was like, no, you can't be friends with your brother's girlfriend because I don't like her. Like, it's just, like, doesn't make sense, you know?
Yeah, and also it's, like, just doesn't like it's just not like a great community-based way to approach anything to kind of like make an effort to like let someone feel comfortable enough but like not but like keep them at a distance in an inexplicable way to make it so that they're not too comfortable. You know what I mean? Like it's you know, instead of having direct conversation, which would be the most mature thing to do.
Yeah.
Which kind of, I think Rachel kind of makes an effort to do.
That's actually what I wrote in my notes. Like later on in the episode, like I actually find that this is like almost a very reasonable plot line. Like it's a very like common plot line personally. Like it doesn't involve that much miscommunication, which like most sitcoms like thrive on miscommunication. This plot line is more like there's not miscommunication. There's just kind of like lying and like not being sure how to navigate certain social dynamics.
And also like immense,
realistic.
Yeah, and also like immense emotions that make it hard to be like rational in the situation as well, you know? I don't particularly think in this situation it's valid of Rachel to expect no one to be friends with Julie. I also simultaneously understand why it would be so upsetting to her.
I just think that if we say that Rachel is being reasonable, then I actually think that we're being kind of hypocritical to Ross, where last season he was kind of being a dick and trying to sabotage everyone that Rachel was in a relationship with. And Rachel now this season, like we've seen it first with like her like basically sabotaging Julie's hair last episode. And then this episode, like her just not wanting anyone to be friends with her. And then later on, as the episodes move on, we see her try to sabotage their relationship in other ways too. And so like, I just think that like this whole, like we shit on Ross a lot. And like Rachel's like kind of doing the same things that we shit on Ross about last season, you know?
Yeah, no, yes. What I'm saying is that I don't think it's reasonable, but I understand her emotions.
Okay, so yeah, so there's like the whole situation in which, so Monica, well, later on, Monica is trying to communicate with Phoebe in this very ridiculous way of like, we went shopping and we bought bras, and then Phoebe doesn't know how to communicate and she's an idiot, and Monica should have known that before she gave her this like, this very important job to do. Phoebe being like, first saying she bought fur, which obviously she doesn't use fur as a vegetarian, and then later she's like, we brought boobs. And Rachel's response of like, you bought boobs? Like, it's just like, it's so funny. Boobs are talked about a lot in this episode.
Also, yeah, really, you're right. I feel like also usually Rachel is a little bit more on it and probably would have caught on. But
Yeah,
it makes for a good
totally.
scene anyway. So like as we, you know, the next episode, the next scene that we're about to kind of delve into is basically like Rachel figuring it out, right? And then what ensues is like this beautiful parallel again in the writing of like basically taking this friendship and paralleling it to being a romantic relationship. And this is something that they do a lot in Friends, both between Rachel and Monica, as well as Chandler and Joey. I think that that's like a really interesting thing because it's like, I don't know, we can interpret it in a lot of ways, like the fact that like friendships can have dynamics that are like, you know, a committed relationship, even though they're not romantic, you know? And so it's interesting that they can intertwine and parallel these things.
Yeah.
But what I also find very interesting here is that like you could kind of look at the situation and say that like, you know, the way that Rachel is reacting is as though she's talking to Ross. You know what I mean? Like she's
Right.
projecting how she feels, which is like hurt and cheated on by Ross, who like she basically created this world where she was like in a relationship with this person, and then suddenly he shows up and he's dating someone else, and now she feels like she's being cheated on or betrayed by him. And then the only person that she can actually communicate it to is Monica. You know, it's like her only
That's
outlet.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting parallel. Like, part of me wants to be like, yeah, the writers are that deep, but another part of me is just like, I don't think the writers are that deep, and I think that they just like wanted to make this a silly like scene, you know?
Look, art is in the eye of the beholder, okay?
All right, yes, true. But later on, okay, later on when like Monica comes to Central Perk, and like she's trying to talk to Rachel outside of Central Perk, and Rachel's like, "Oh, did my back hurt your knife?" Which is like
Yeah.
such a petty line.
Well, no, I actually wrote down that I thought that that was an amazing line that is like very in character for Rachel. Like she's someone that's like will take no shit from no one. You know what I mean? And like I feel like that's
Right.
like a really great line. Like I feel like I should have used that line in the past at some point where it's sort of like yeah, maybe in this situation not totally valid, you know, like maybe you could feel betrayed because Monica has been lying to you for like the last little while about what she's been doing, which like makes sense to it at the very least feel betrayed in that way. But
Right.
like to just take like no shit from no one and be like, you stabbed me in the back and have that line. I don't know. I think it's pretty good.
I see. That's interesting because I actually kind of disagree. Like, I don't think that Rachel is a character who takes no shit from no one. Like, I think that she builds into that later in future seasons, but especially in season 1, season 2, even up to season 3, season 4. Like, she's kind of like she's a real big pushover. Like, even in later seasons, like it's like kind of an ongoing theme with Rachel is that she's a pushover.
Okay,
Like,
I am going. Okay, I see where you mean by that, but I look forward to the rest of this season pointing out all the ways that I think that Rachel is a badass.
Whoa. Okay. I think that someone can be both a pushover and a badass, and I speak from personal experience.
Right, but I'm saying that like when Rachel is hurt, she's not a pushover.
Yeah,
Like,
totally. And so I think that like that's kind of what I just wanted to say is like you said that like she won't take shit from anyone, but I actually disagree. I think she'll take a lot of shit from a lot of people, but who she won't take shit from is like the people who are most important to her.
Yeah.
Like she won't take shit. Like she'll like take shit from, you know, like coworkers or bosses or whatever, but she won't take shit from like her friend, her like closest friends. And I think that that's what I find interesting about her character. Like she almost knows when it's worth it for her to give a shit and when it's not worth it for her to give a shit, you know? It's kind of this like, I don't know. But I do feel like this whole conversation, this whole scene is like a very realistic scene and a very realistic conversation.
Yeah,
where like
totally.
Rachel then goes on to like tell Monica honestly what's going on, which I find so often in Friends, like they don't actually ever really talk about, like there's no ever real conclusion to things where people fought. Like they just kind of end it and like people are fine without actually having like a real conversation about it. And I do feel like this conversation is really good. Like Rachel honestly expresses what her real concerns are, and then Monica like tries to comfort her and is like, look, I want to be there for you, but at the same time, like I'm not going to not be friends with Julie. Like she's just someone who met a guy and fell in love is what she says, right? And it's like, I'm not going to be mad at Julie while you process your feelings, basically, is what she's trying to say.
Yeah.
And I really like that. And then obviously the whole situation where Phoebe wants to get in on the hugs is just the fucking cutest thing in the world.
Oh, I really needed that.
Yeah. It's so, so good. Like Phoebe
Yeah.
I just want to give Phoebe so many hugs.
I know, it's so good. Yeah. But then, segue to Rachel making the effort, asking Julie to have a conversation.
Ridiculous effort.
Well, it starts off good, right? Where, and Rachel manages to get like honest with Julie about like how she feels or her own inner struggles. And whenever I see this scene, I find it really interesting because, like, if I was in Rachel's position, I probably would have, like, I feel like in certain ways, the way she talks about it, it feels a little bit almost, like, obvious that, like, there's alluding to the fact that she possibly has feelings for Ross. And I feel like I would have been much more guarded with that.
Yeah. So, like, I wrote in my notes, I was like, does Julie not realize that Rachel's into Ross? And like, to me, if I was in Julie's position, I feel like it would be really obvious. And I feel like because it's so obvious, I would have shared that with Ross.
Right.
Like I would have been like, do you have a history with Rachel that I don't know about? Like,
yeah,
like,
totally.
She seems to be really upset with the fact that like we're dating, like, is there something going on with that? Like, should I know about this? And so I feel like it's kind of weird that she wouldn't have shared that with Ross, and like maybe they're just still new in their relationship, so she's trying to navigate it. But like, I just think that like she's smarter than that, and I find like it's kind of silly that they're presenting that Julie would have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I want to give on a totally hundo p different note, except still about Julie. I want to give her a shout out, and I wrote that if we were giving out a best outfit of the episode award, her outfit in this last scene would win the award. I freaking love it. This like long sleeve white shirt with this long skirt, like this floral print skirt.
Yeah.
And then she just has this cute purse, and I find her outfit is like top notch. She looks so good, and I'm very jealous of it. It's going to be a tough call this week in terms of the best friend of the episode award.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any real answer. Like I was like, Susan, but Susan doesn't actually do anything that merits her the best friend. I just like want to give it to her because she's not often in it. In some ways, I think that Chandler is the best friend of the episode.
Oh,
like
why?
The way in that
that's
bar
just because he was the
scene-
bartender.
Yeah, but I actually think that he gives Joey really solid advice in this scene, and he doesn't lie to anyone in this scene, and he's like not super obnoxious this episode. So Chandler not being obnoxious, Chandler not being super rude to his friends, and Chandler giving some motivational speech from him to his friends is actually like, I know the bar is low for Chandler, but like that's pretty good.
I was gonna say, Emily, do you hear yourself?
I do.
Also, not to mention the beginning of the episode, he starts off like squealing and like freaking out about the fact that, Carol was breastfeeding in front of him. Sorry, I'm not going to crap on yours. That doesn't make him
a bad friend.
No.
It just makes him like a child.
Yeah. I would say, like, some ways I would vote Monica because she talks some sense into Rachel, but at the same time, she spent the entire episode lying and sneaking around behind Rachel's back, which, like, I mean, like, I have issues with lying as a person in general. So, like, I feel like I particularly am, like, unmotivated to give her a best friend of the episode because of that. But I think that, like, Ross plays a really interesting role in, like, navigating, like, upholding. I don't know. I think it's really hard. Maybe you're right with Chandler. I don't know what to say.
I guess Ross is not a bad contender.
Like, he has his own issues, but, like, I think that at the same time in this episode, he does a really good job of, like, navigating, trying to be a middle ground and, like, supporting his dude friends.
I don't know. No, like Chandler actually gives like really good advice to Joey. I think like his speech to Joey is really good. Like he's like, you know,
That's fair.
so what? You like change to like do something else. Like next thing you know, someone's going to be like, someone comes along and slices a better cheddar than you. Like he's just kind of like gives him this speech of like, someone's always going to be better than you. And like, you just need to show up and like do the best you can kind of thing. And show this guy that you can do the best you can. I don't know. I think it's a pretty decent speech.
Yeah, no, I okay. So I'm gonna get on board with you. Let's say Chandler is the best friend of the episode.
Yeah, it's a little cringy to say that out loud, but
We weren't working with much, guys.
yeah.
All right. But I think that's everything for this week. So thanks again to Beth for becoming a patron. And thank you everyone for tuning in this week. Don't forget that if you like the episode, to leave us a rating on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. Make sure to get in touch with us on Instagram. We're WT Phalange Podcast is our handle. And make sure that you stick around enough so that you can interact on our posts and be a part of next time's polls.
And if you do have a couple more dollars this month, sending us, coming over to our Patreon page and supporting us on Patreon is an excellent way to ensure that this podcast keeps going.
Yep, totally. My name is Quinn. You can find me at the handle MindBody with Quinn or the basic NB on Instagram.
And my name is Emily. You can find me at emiliebyoga.com or my handle EmilieByoga. That's Emily with an IE, not a Y. As always, keep deconstructing
and diversifying
the media you consume.